There is a question that has fascinated me for a long time. Why do some people achieve extraordinary results while the vast majority, despite working just as hard, stay exactly where they are? We are taught from a very young age to follow a specific playbook. Go to school, get a job, work hard, and follow the rules. This is what we call the 95% mindset. It is a system built on conformity, safety, and predictability, and there is nothing inherently wrong with it. It keeps the world moving, but it is designed to produce average results. The people who achieve the extraordinary, the top 5%, do not just work harder. They do not possess a secret pool of talent that the rest of us lack. They operate on a completely different psychological framework. They think differently. And the core of this 5% mindset is something nobody really talks about. It is the total willingness to accept short-term misunderstanding in exchange for long-term fulfillment. You see, the 95% mindset is driven by the need for immediate validation. We want our peers to approve of our choices right now. We want the comfort of looking like everyone else. But the 5% mindset understands a fundamental truth about human nature. If you want to achieve results that only 5% of the population achieves, you must be willing to do what 95% of the population is unwilling to do. And the hardest thing to do is to stand alone while your vision is still invisible to everyone else. Think about how we solve problems. The majority of the world looks at what already exists and tries to make it slightly better. They look at the competition and try to run a little faster. This is incremental thinking. The 5% mindset practices foundational thinking. They do not ask, how do I do this better than them? They ask, why are we doing this in the first place? They look at the source, the purpose, and the underlying human need. Because when you understand the why behind a problem, you are no longer competing with the existing system. You are creating a new one. Extraordinary results require us to redefine our relationship with failure. In the traditional playbook, failure is a destination. It is a sign that you should stop, turn back, and find a safer path. But to the 5% mind, failure is not the opposite of success. It is the data that fuels success. It is an educational metric. Every setback is simply a lesson in what does not work, which brings you one step closer to what does. To adopt this mindset, you have to stop looking at the horizon and start looking at the foundation. You have to commit to a vision that matters so deeply to you that the daily friction, the doubts of others, and the temporary failures become completely irrelevant. It is not about being reckless. It is about being deeply intentional. When you shift your focus from seeking approval to seeking impact, and from following the crowd to understanding the core truth of what you are building, you naturally step out of the 95%. That is where true innovation lies. That is how you achieve the extraordinary. 5 keynotes of the speech, the cost of the extraordinary. Achieving unique results requires a willingness to face short-term social misunderstanding and isolation, as the majority will rarely understand an unconventional vision initially. Foundational over incremental thinking. The 5% mindset does not focus on beating the competition at their own game. It asks deeper, foundational questions to redefine the problem entirely. Redefining failure as data rather than viewing failure as a definitive end or an emotional setback. The top 5% treat it as necessary, objective educational data to refine their approach. Intentionality over validation. True growth happens when an individual shifts their focus from seeking immediate peer approval to driving long-term meaningful impact. The illusion of the playbook. Standard societal paths are designed for predictability and average results. Extraordinary achievements require stepping away from standard compliance to build a new framework. To truly understand what it takes to step into the top 5% of achievers, we have to talk about the hidden tax that excellence demands. It is a tax that is rarely mentioned in motivational books or business seminars, yet it is the ultimate gatekeeper of extraordinary success. That tax is the willingness to accept short-term misunderstanding. The moment you decide to pursue a path that deviates from the conventional playbook, you automatically sign up to be misjudged, questioned, and isolated by the 95% who still operate within the traditional framework. This is not because those people are inherently malicious or wish for your failure. It is simply because human nature is hardwired to fear what it does not understand. Conformity provides a deep sense of psychological safety. When you choose comfort and predictability, your peers validate you because your choices mirror theirs. But the second you step outside that circle to build an invisible vision, you disrupt that shared comfort. You become a mirror reflecting the risks they were too afraid to take, and their natural response is to project their own doubts and anxieties onto you. Living through this phase of social isolation is the hardest part of the entrepreneurial or creative journey. In the early stages of any massive breakthrough, your vision exists only in your mind. To the rest of the world, you just look reckless, impractical, or even foolish. You might be turning down a stable job, spending your weekends working alone in a room, or investing your resources into a concept that has no immediate return on investment. During this period, the applause is non-existent. The people closest to you, your friends, your colleagues, and sometimes even your family, will offer well-meaning advice disguised as caution, urging you to return to the safe path. The 5% mindset recognizes that this skepticism is not a sign that you are on the wrong track. It is actually a prerequisite for doing something truly unique. If everyone immediately understood and approved of your idea, It would mean your idea is already ordinary. It would mean it fits perfectly within the existing framework of the 95%. True innovation, by definition, must feel disruptive and unfamiliar at first. Enduring this isolation requires a radical shift in how you process validation. The majority of society is driven by immediate feedback loops. We post something online, we want likes instantly. We do a job, we want praise today. But an extraordinary life cannot be built on short-term applause. The 5% mindset replaces the need for immediate external approval with an unshakable internal alignment. You have to become so deeply grounded in your purpose that the silence of others does not cause you to doubt your direction. You must learn to carry the weight of being misjudged without letting it corrupt your energy or slow your momentum. It means accepting that you will be invited to fewer social gatherings, that your old peers might look at you with quiet pity, and that you will have to make peace with being the outsider. This period of friction is actually an educational filtering mechanism. It strips away your reliance on superficial validation and forces you to build genuine psychological resilience. Every great pioneer, creator, and leader who ever changed industry had to survive this exact wilderness. They had to sit in the discomfort of being the only person in the room who believed in what they were doing. The beauty of this process, however, is that short-term misunderstanding is exactly that, temporary. If you hold your ground, stay intentional, and allow your consistency to compound over time, the invisible vision eventually becomes an undeniable reality. When the results finally manifest, a strange phenomenon occurs. The very same crowd that labeled you unrealistic or crazy will suddenly call you a genius. They will look at your extraordinary results and claim it was inevitable, completely forgetting the months or years you spent enduring their doubt in silence. The 5% do not wait for the crowd to catch up, nor do they hold a grudge when they finally do. They simply understand that the price of admission to an extraordinary life is the courage to stand alone until the rest of the world finally sees what you saw all along. To truly innovate and step away from the crowd, you must change the very mechanics of how you solve problems. Most of the world operates on what we call incremental thinking. This is the practice of looking at what already exists, looking at the current marketplace or the established system, and trying to make it just a little bit better, a little bit faster, or a little bit cheaper. It is the equivalent of running a race where your entire strategy is based on looking over your shoulder at the person next to you and trying to take slightly larger strides. While this approach can keep you competitive in the short term, it inherently traps you within the boundaries set by other people. You are still playing their game by their rules inside their stadium. The 5% mindset, however, rejects this competitive trap entirely. Instead of practicing incremental thinking, the top 5% engage in foundational thinking. They do not look at the competition to find their direction. They look directly at the underlying truth of the problem itself. Foundational thinking requires you to strip away all the assumptions, traditions, and hand me down wisdom that society takes for granted. The majority of people do things simply because that is the way they have always been done. They inherit processes, habits, and structures without ever questioning their validity. When a problem arises, their immediate reaction is to ask how others have solved it in the past. But when you adopt a foundational mindset, your first step is to discard the existing blueprint entirely. You do not ask how to do something better than the person next to you. You ask why we are doing it in the first place. You break a situation down to its absolute most basic, undeniable truths, and you build your solution upward from there. This is a highly analytical, rigorous way of looking at the world. It forces you to separate human behavior and actual physical limitations from mere cultural habits. When you stop obsessing over the competition and start obsessing over the core truth of the human need you are trying to serve, the entire landscape changes. When you think foundationally, you stop competing within an existing market and instead start creating entirely new ones. Incremental thinkers are constantly fighting over the same small piece of the pie, trying to optimize an old framework that might actually be completely obsolete. Foundational thinkers realize that it is far more valuable to build a completely new pie. This shift in perspective completely eliminates the anxiety of competition. You are no longer worried about someone copying your features or undercutting your price because you are operating on a deeper level of understanding than they are. You have solved the problem at its root while they are merely painting over the surface. This educational approach to life and business requires immense intellectual honesty. It means you must be willing to admit when a widely accepted system is broken or illogical, even if everyone else is praising it. It means you have to look past the trends, the buzzwords, and the superficial metrics of success to see the foundational reality underneath. Ultimately, shifting from incremental to foundational thinking is what separates the managers from the visionaries. It transforms you from someone who simply executes a playbook into someone who writes a brand new playbook for others to follow. It requires you to slow down, ask uncomfortable questions, and challenge the very basis of your own industry. But the reward for this intellectual courage is absolute clarity. While the 95% are caught up in a chaotic, exhausting race to outmaneuver one another, the 5% are quietly building frameworks that render the old race completely irrelevant. By focusing entirely on first principles and foundational truths, you give yourself the unique leverage required to deliver truly extraordinary, world-changing results. To achieve extraordinary results, you must completely overhaul your psychological and emotional relationship with failure. In the conventional playbook followed by the 95%, failure is treated as a definitive tragic destination. It is viewed as a shameful stop sign, an embarrassing public indicator that you lack talent, or a clear message from the universe that you should pack up your things, turn back, and find a safer, more predictable path. This deeply ingrained fear of making mistakes paralyzes the majority of people, keeping them trapped in a state of perpetual hesitation where they choose stagnation over the risk of falling down. The 5% mindset, however, completely strips failure of its emotional weight and dramatic narrative. To the top 5%, failure is not the opposite of success. It is an absolute necessity functioning as the primary mechanism that fuels success. They view it through a purely educational and objective lens, treating every mistake, setback, or rejected idea not as a personal indictment, but as invaluable raw data. When you remove the emotional drama from a setback, it transforms from a painful scar into a highly practical metric. Imagine a scientist working in a laboratory trying to discover a cure for a disease. If their first 99 experiments fail to yield the desired result, the scientist does not throw their hands up in despair, declare themselves a fraud, and abandon the profession. Instead, they meticulously document the results of those 99 attempts. They analyze what went wrong, adjust the variables, and recognize that knowing 99 ways that do not work brings them infinitely closer to the one way that will. This is exactly how the 5% mind operates in the real world. They treat life as a grand laboratory and their ambitions as a series of experiments. Every time a marketing campaign flops, a product launch stalls, or a business strategy collapses, they do not internalize the event as a reflection of their self-worth. They simply look at the ruins, extract the data, and ask themselves what specific truth this outcome has just revealed to them. Adopting this perspective requires an immense amount of intellectual humility and resilience. It means you must actively seek out the friction of the real world, knowing that you will inevitably stumble. The 95% spend their lives trying to design perfect, risk-free plans in their heads, waiting for the ideal moment when they can guarantee a flawless execution. But the 5% understand that clarity does not come from passive thinking. Clarity only comes from active engagement. You cannot think your way out of a problem you haven't actually faced yet. By launching into action early and willingly embracing the messiness of mistakes, the 5% gather real-world data at a rate that the hesitant majority could never match. They iterate faster, adapt quicker, and use their failures to build an educational moat around their vision. While everyone else is still debating the theory, the 5% have already tested the reality, absorbed the damage, and adjusted their trajectory based on concrete evidence. Ultimately, treating failure as objective data is what allows an individual to sustain momentum when things go completely wrong. It changes the internal dialogue from a destructive narrative of defeat to a constructive process of diagnosis. You stop asking emotional questions like why this always happens to you, and you start asking analytical questions about what variable needs to be changed next. This shift completely disarms the fear of failure, removing its power to paralyze you. When you no longer fear the emotional sting of making a mistake, you become unstoppable. You become willing to take the massive, unconventional risks required to achieve extraordinary outcomes, because you know that even if you fail, you will walk away with the exact knowledge required to win on the next attempt. To step completely out of the ordinary and into the top 5%, you must consciously and radically shift the primary fuel that drives your daily actions. The vast majority of society is driven, consciously or unconsciously, by the constant need for immediate peer validation. We live in a culture that is meticulously designed to reward conformity and instant feedback loops. From the educational systems that grade us based on our ability to color within the lines, to the digital algorithms that quantify our social worth through likes and views, we are constantly trained to seek the applause of the crowd. The problem with relying on external validation is that it forces you to build your life on a foundation of quicksand. If your self-worth, your motivation, and your strategic choices are dependent on the approval of others, you can only ever go as far as the crowd is willing to let you go. You become trapped in a state of superficial compliance, tweaking your actions to please an audience that is inherently fickle and risk-averse. The 5% mindset breaks free from this exhausting cycle by replacing the hunger for validation with an absolute devotion to intentionality and impact. When you are driven by intentionality, you no longer look at a project or a career path and ask how it will make you look to your peers or whether it will earn you quick praise. Instead, you look past the immediate horizon and ask what meaningful change your work will actually produce. You shift your focus from looking successful to actually being effective. This transition requires a profound level of self-awareness and internal discipline, because focusing on impact often means doing work that is completely invisible, unglamorous, and deeply lonely for extended periods of time. True impact is rarely built on center stage under a spotlight. It is forged in the quiet, mundane, and repetitive daily disciplines that nobody else sees or cares about. While the 95% are busy curating the illusion of progress to win social approval, the 5% are deeply anchored in the actual substance of what they are creating. This educational shift in perspective completely rewires your relationship with your environment. When your primary metric is external praise, every criticism, every silent room, and every indifferent reaction from the market feels like an existential crisis. It makes you hesitant, fragile, and prone to abandoning your deepest convictions the moment the crowd stops cheering. But when your guiding star is long-term impact, you become remarkably resilient to the shifting winds of public opinion. If a product launch or creative project fails to get immediate applause, you do not view it as a disaster. You simply evaluate whether the core intention was sound, analyze the actual real-world effect it had, and refine your execution. You realize that the lack of immediate praise is often just a sign that your work is challenging the status quo, which is exactly what true innovation is supposed to do. You stop treating the crowd as your boss and start treating your vision as your master. Living an intentional life means that you deliberately choose depth over surface. You become highly selective about where you direct your time, your energy, and your cognitive resources, ruthlessly cutting away the superficial distractions that exist purely to make you look busy or important. You stop competing in the arena of status symbols and start measuring your days by the tangible value you are adding to the problem you have chosen to solve. This profound shift from seeking approval to seeking impact is ultimately what unlocks extraordinary capabilities. By refusing to waste your mental energy on managing the perceptions of others, you free up massive amounts of creative and analytical bandwidth to focus entirely on excellence. When you stop demanding that the world validate your journey before you have even reached the destination, you develop the unique, quiet authority required to create things that truly matter, leaving a lasting legacy that the validation-seeking majority can only ever dream of. To truly understand the trap of mediocrity, we must closely examine the very design of the traditional paths laid out before us. From the moment we enter the formal education system, we are handed a standardized playbook. It is a highly structured blueprint that promises a specific, predictable sequence if you attend the right schools, memorize the accepted facts, secure a traditional job, and carefully follow the established corporate rules. You will be rewarded with safety, stability, and a comfortable life. For 95% of the population, this framework functions as the ultimate safety net. It is designed by society to minimize risk, reduce chaos, and maintain a highly predictable, manageable order. But the critical truth that the top 5% recognize, and what the majority completely overlooks, is that this societal playbook is built entirely to produce average results. It is technically impossible to achieve an extraordinary, unique life while strictly adhering to a system whose entire mathematical purpose is to ensure conformity and mass standard compliance. The illusion of the playbook lies in its deceptive promise of security. It convinces people that following the crowd is the smartest way to avoid danger. However, in a rapidly evolving, hyper-competitive world, this rigid compliance actually introduces a massive, hidden risk, the risk of total obsolescence and unfulfilled human potential. When you follow a pre-written script, you are essentially outsourcing your critical thinking, your strategy, and your unique creative instincts to a legacy system built for a previous era. You stop asking deep, original questions and instead focus entirely on how well you can execute someone else's instructions. The 5% mindset recognizes that this absolute reliance on predictability is a psychological trap. Extraordinary achievements, by their very definition, exist completely outside the boundaries of the standard playbook. To create a groundbreaking business, pioneer an innovative artistic medium, or solve a seemingly impossible industry problem, you have to possess the courage to step off the paved road and build an entirely new framework from scratch. Stepping away from the playbook does not mean being reckless, erratic, or rebellious just for the sake of it. Rather, it requires a highly disciplined, educational approach to creating your own systems. The 5% do not simply break the rules, they master the underlying principles of human behavior, economics, and strategy so deeply that they can rewrite the rules entirely. They replace the rigid, external structure of the societal playbook with a flexible, highly intentional internal framework. Instead of asking what the job description requires, they analyze what the market desperately needs but isn't getting. Instead of looking at the standard career ladder, they build their own platform. This shift requires immense intellectual self-reliance because when you abandon the traditional script, you lose the comfort of immediate institutional validation. You can no longer point to a standard title or a corporate hierarchy to prove your worth to your peers. You have to be entirely comfortable operating in the open space of your own self-determined metrics. Ultimately, the 95% remain trapped by the playbook because they confuse compliance with competence. They believe that being a flawless rule follower automatically guarantees a meaningful, extraordinary impact. But true innovation requires you to view the traditional playbook not as a sacred law to be followed blindly, but merely as a historical reference point, an example of how things used to be done. When you break free from the illusion that safety equals success, you reclaim your full creative autonomy. You stop letting standard cultural expectations dictate the limits of your ambition. By actively choosing to design your own framework, test your own hypotheses, and navigate the inherent discomfort of the unknown, you transition from a passive passenger in someone else's system into an active author of your own destiny. That is the exact point where ordinary compliance ends and truly extraordinary, world-changing results begin. Ultimately, stepping into the 5% mindset is not a matter of luck, genetics, or superficial privilege. It is a profound, conscious choice to reject the comfort of the standard playbook in pursuit of a higher standard of excellence. It demands that you accept temporary isolation while your vision is still invisible to the crowd. It requires you to stop trying to beat your competitors at their own game and instead ask the deep, foundational questions that change the game entirely. It forces you to strip failure of its emotional drama treating every setback as raw, educational data designed to refine your trajectory. And it asks you to stop trading your unique potential for the cheap, short-term applause of a risk-averse society, anchoring yourself instead in deep intentionality and lasting impact. The 95% path will always be there. It is well-paved, crowded, and highly predictable, but it will only ever deliver average results. If you truly want to achieve the extraordinary, you must have the courage to step off that path, endure the discomfort of being misunderstood, and build your own framework from the ground up. The world does not need more people who flawlessly execute the old script. The world is waiting for those who are willing to think differently, challenge the status quo, and show us what is truly possible. Turn away from the crowd, trust the foundational truths of your vision, and step into the 5%.